Good evening, firecrafters, and welcome to my basement. About a year and a half ago, I decided that I was going to learn how to do hand drill fire by friction. And like many new hand drillers, one of my first experiences was palm-sized blisters. And it took several days for them to heal. And after they healed, I started forming some calluses. And I decided that I better figure out a way to condition my hands so that my blisters didn't come back again. And I also decided that I wanted to learn how to do some floating. And what I did was I set up what I call a floating station here on the corner of my workbench down in my basement. It's just a piece of hard wood. This is just a slice of maple clamped to the corner of my workbench. Any hardwood would do, ash, hickory, oak, anything hard. My goal is not to create an ember. That's not my goal. My goal instead is to practice my floating and condition my hands. That's the only purpose for this floating station. And you'll notice that I do this while I'm standing, primarily for the reason that I usually do this for a couple minutes after I get home from work before supper. I'm usually wearing my work clothes. When I'm actually doing my hand drilling and trying to make embers, I'm usually working on the ground. But for purposes of floating practice, I'm standing usually in my work clothes. I don't want to get dirty, so I do it standing here at the corner of my workbench. My two favorite stalks to use are these two. This is a piece of goldenrod. I've trimmed all the nubs off of it. It's fairly gentle on my hands. The one I use more often than not, though, is this. I honestly have no idea what this stalk is. I cut it on one of my morning walks about a year ago. It's got ribs that go from one end to the other. It's really rough on my hands, and it's been really great for helping to condition the palms of my hands when I do what I call fast passing. I don't know what it is. If you have any idea what this is, just post a comment down in the comment section and help me out. But that's it. This is my floating station. I typically will float about 100 to 150 times, and then I'll do 5 to 6 fast passes down the stalk. Takes me 2 to 3 minutes tops. I do that every single day, and I've done it for more than a year, and I've had almost no blisters. Every now and then I might get a blister when I'm really aggressive with my hand drilling, but almost none, and usually they're real tiny and they heal very quickly. I recommend setting up a floating station. I wanted to talk a little bit about the motion for floating. Some people will say that the idea of floating is sort of a seesaw type action of your hands. And that is actually not correct. The actual action is you tip your hand and you push it forward, straight like that. The floating action is this. That. It is not a seesaw type of action. It's just not. Let me show you why. Let me put my finger here. I'm going to call that the mean point of contact with my hand. Watch what happens when I do a seesaw action. The mean point of contact on my hand doesn't change. Well, look what happens if I tip my hand and push it forward. Here, the mean point of contact on my hand is there. If I push my hand forward, the mean point of contact moves up. Now, when I'm trying to float, I'm floating and I'm also pressing down. The downward pressure of my hands on the stalk tends to make my hand want to slide down the stalk. But since the mean point of contact is moving upward, that counteracts the tendency for my hands to slide down, and that's what allows you to float. So with no pressure, I'm not putting any pressure at all on my stalk, and I'm exaggerating my motion out. Watch what happens. I can, with no pressure whatsoever, I can walk my hands up the spindle. You see that? The motion you want to develop when you're floating is this. Push it, tip it up, pull it back. Tip it, push it forward. Tip it, pull it back. That's the motion you want to develop. And as you press harder, you'll need to tip your hands more aggressively. Now, I'm really exaggerating at this point. My hands are rarely ever tipped that much. Earlier when you saw me doing my practice session, my hands were just barely tipped. In practice, your hands are not going to tip very much. But that's the motion. It is not a seesaw type motion. It's a tip, push, tip, pull, tip, push, tip, pull. Anyway, once I came to that realization, I was able to learn floating pretty quickly. When I first started this, I had a hard time. I would pop my spindle out of the divot. I did that several times. Sometimes I would only get maybe 10 or 15 floats before I would pop it out. I just kept practicing. I practiced every single day for about 2 weeks until I could float about 100 times while keeping my spindle in the divot. Once I got to the point where I could float for about 100 times, I started adding pressure. After I got to that point, I started doing fast passes down the spindle to really condition my hands. And my typical practice session now is about 2 to 3 minutes long. I float about 150 times. I'm going to do 5 or 6 fast passes down the spindle. My palms will be nice and red. Sometimes I'll generate a little bit of smoke, but no ember. That's not my goal. I'm just trying to do some practicing. Encourage you to give it a try. Set up a little floating station for yourself down in your basement. Pick up a spindle that's gentle on your hands and maybe progress to something that's really aggressive. Practice that motion. Tip, push, tip, pull. Forget about the seesaw motion. Start slow. Work at it, persist at it. In 2 or 3 weeks you'll be floating. Start adding pressure. Start increasing your fast passes, and you'll have good deep calluses like I've got on my hands and my knuckles now. Encourage you to give it a try. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.